Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to welcome you to Creating Holistic User Experiences for Library Services. I'm Pamela Blue, your host for today's session. You may wonder why ALCTS offers a webinar on a topic that on the surface seems far removed from what might be considered traditional technical services activities. The explanation is quite simple. We strive to create effective experiences for users throughout the organization, whether for our co-workers or for our patrons. Gaina Williams, our speaker this afternoon, has an extensive background in developing products and services that empower individuals and their organizations to flourish. Gaina began her professional career at Microsoft, where, as Director of User Experience, she concentrated on the application of UX approaches to products including Windows, Internet Explorer, and MSN. Building on those experiences, in 2011, she founded Swash Consulting to provide coaching, consulting, and research services to clients who include major international technology companies, government organizations, and nonprofits. In January 2014, Gaina and a colleague, Tracy Lovejoy, launched UX Careers Unlimited to help UX professionals to develop their leadership potential. To advance that goal, last spring, they created U in UX, an online event consisting of more than 30 webinars presented by leaders in the user experience arena. As she was putting the final touches on the U in UX webinars, I had the good fortune to meet Gaina virtually and was intrigued by the possibilities UX offers librarians. She has much to share with us about creating valuable experiences for our users. Gaina welcomes your questions. Please use the question box on your screen to submit your questions. Today's webinar will be recorded and all attendees will be sent a link to the recording shortly after the conclusion of the program. And now, there may be a slight delay as I turn the program over to Gaina.
Okay, so good morning everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. And I just want to do a quick check. Pamela, can you see my screen right now? My presentation screen?
Yeah, yes, I do.
Okay, fabulous. So we can get started. Well, I really want to thank Pamela and her colleagues for inviting me to talk to you today. I think, like, you'll hear during my talk that user experiences are just everywhere, and they're absolutely would be great to have fabulous experiences for library services. And so I'm going to be providing you I don't believe it's an area where I believe that everybody actually, if they pay a little attention to understanding the people they serve, and really walking in other people's shoes, that we can do a lot more to improve all our experiences. And I hope that's something you'll take away from the talk today. So first off, yes, this is me. I am up in Seattle today, and I've got to tell you, we have a beautiful day that has just appeared between the rainy days up here. And as Pamela introduced me, she talked about sort of my background being from user experience at Microsoft and some of the recent work I've been doing. I always like to think, actually even more expansively than user experiences, people deserve great experiences. And that's the one thing that I had very early on in my training when I studied ergonomics and human factors, was to really think about how people use environments and systems. So in addition to this working with Microsoft, I've looked at vehicle systems, intelligent vehicle systems back in the 90s, to really understand collision avoidance systems and how whether alarms and warnings were going to be useful to help people avoid collisions. I've looked at video conferencing systems for people who speak English as a second language to understand exactly how does that help people with communication and what kind of services we need there. recently I've been working with a department to look at innovation technologies to help people with PTSD. So it was a very different group of people I've worked with there, and I've also been working with architects and design firms on the actual interior design of buildings. And so it's really broad-ranging what experiences actually are. So I'm actually going to have you participate at the beginning here. I am going to have you complete a poll question for me. And it should appear on your screen in just a moment. So in your day-to-day work, are you mostly working directly with the public, mostly working behind the scenes, about 50-50, or other? And if you're an other, you could type what you think your balance is, or sort of what other means to you in your question box. That would be great. Okay, so I'm seeing the answers come in, and it looks like we've got about 30% mostly work behind the scenes, and about around 70% look like they're 50-50 between public facing and behind the scenes. That's great. That's great information for me to have as we go through the presentation today. So here we go into what is user experience. And again, I'm going to have you do a little bit of work here. What comes to your mind when I say library user experiences? If you could type what comes to mind in the question box, that would be great. So let's see. I think people are spending a little bit of time thinking about this. Oh, great. We've got physical space. Interaction with online catalogs. Personal interaction. Oh, helping customers out at the library, the check-in desk. Okay, so meeting user needs. All right, so we've got a few answers coming in there, and that's great. So I'm just going to take you through, when I was asked to do this, what came to my mind when I first started to think about library user experiences. Traditionally, the term user experience has been applied to websites and software. That's where it really got popular, probably in the early 90s in industry. This is one space where we definitely saw user experience applied. The user was a user of software and websites. But more recently, user experiences has definitely expanded to devices, especially reading devices, Kindles, telephones, smartphones. And so there's the experience is expanding from just the software side to now really thinking about the actual hardware and input devices. And then we can expand it even further when you're thinking about experiences, to really think about sort of the overall checkout systems, book return areas, conference room booking systems. I mean, experience and software really starts to show up everywhere. And in fact, even as we look into these photographs, it's what else do we see that relates to experience? So I always want us to, when you're thinking about experiences, to really expand it, to think about the actual whole environment. And so when we often, as I said, we think about software and websites really as the focal point for user experience, but we really need to be expanding it to include all these areas, because we definitely know that the software only is part of that experience. So they can be physical items, they can be emotional items, they can be spaces. So again, as we look through this list, it was interesting, I looked at a couple of photographs and looking at library spaces, it's like even vending machines are part of that experience. So it really is pretty sort of expansive. And so when I'm thinking through what experience is, I always like to think of three specific things. One is the people. Who, in this case, let's start with the public, the people in the system. Who are they? I mean, you have a very broad range of people that are part of the system, and it's really important to think about. So the people are central. And then we think about the tools, and this is where I think tools now can include all those areas of the books, the signage, the computers, and the software systems, whereas I said traditionally we would spend a little bit more time just on software systems. We look at the keyboards, hardware, e-books, notebooks, pens, what the areas of return, scanners, library cards, and I'm sure you know many more tools that are in your public environments in the library. And I also apologize right now, I don't have all the technical jargon of library systems, having not spent as much time in these spaces as you. But these are definitely, so you would be able to expand upon this list, I'm sure. And then finally, it's the environments. And as I mentioned from looking at those earlier images, we're looking at counters, shelves, chairs, tables, desks, restrooms, lighting, I mean, noise, all these contribute to that experience. And so whenever we're looking at experience, it's important to look at people and their interaction with tools and the interaction of the environment as well. It has these three parts. That's what creates people experience. And this is, I want us to expand that definition even more and go behind the scenes. And actually, I noticed a couple of people did type in that, you know, thinking about the tools for staff and librarians. Considering a tool is considering staff and librarians as a resource. So that's interesting. Somebody has just submitted that as a comment. Is that for the public, the actual staff are seen as tools. And so that's just an interesting way of how we all engage, how people engage in this system. So behind the scenes, you have all the different services you belong to and the different spaces you're in, from collection management, cataloging systems, IT departments, community outreach, HR. There's a whole host of behind-the-scenes aspects that need to be considered, and we can consider them in isolation, as in how do you improve those experiences for behind the scenes, but then also we have to think about them as a collective of considering public environment interacting with the behind-the-scenes environment. So again, if we go through that same process, we'd look at the people, and I've listed some of the job roles and job functions that I'm aware of, but you have many people within your organizations. Then we'd look at the tools that you use, custom tools, licensing, management tools. There's a whole set of experiences that are going to come from those interactions with the people that are in that system. And then we also have environments. I'm sure that you've worked in great environments sometimes and more challenging ones at others, and it all affects your work experience, and it can affect actually what your output is, what your product is. So we need to be thinking very carefully between these three. So my claim is that great experiences really comes from getting both the public experience and the organization experiences right. Because one, you can consider these systems in isolation. Let's work towards improving the public experience. Some people may be working specifically on let's make the tools to support the organization better, so improving that experience. But then we also have this interaction between the public experience and the organization experience, which are closely connected. And I'm going to flag one thing here because I'm sure that some of you at some point may work with an outside consulting company to create experiences. And the reason I'm flagging it is often not often, that would be unfair. Occasionally I have seen design agencies that are very good at focusing on that public experience and are very good at creating demonstrations on what the end user public side is, and they'll actually forget to do a really great job on the internal system. And so if you do work with agencies, it's really important to make sure that they understand the work that happens in the background and what those needs are, as much as they spend time understanding that the end customer experience. Because it's together, you need both to work well to create a great system. So again, at this point, it's like experience really comes from looking at the people in the system, the tools and their interactions there, and how the environment also influences the experience. So what is the people experience cycle? How do we create and design great experiences for people? So I've decided to put my action item request to you, the most important action item request, up front here for you. I want you in the next month to take 2 hours to observe how the people you serve get their tasks done. And the reason for this request is you really don't have to do much preparation for it, but it will improve how you go about serving these people. And this is an activity whether you are looking at the public or whether the people you serve are internal people in your organization. To spend time to really see how these people actually get their jobs done, what works well for them, what challenges they face, what motivations they have, will really help you improve what you deliver to them. And so to be able to really have full empathy and to see with your eyes open and your ears open, listening to sort of what it is they are trying to do, what things they get challenged with. I can't tell you how valuable it is. I have worked with many teams who thought they knew their user because at some point they had read a report or they had glanced at what somebody is doing, and then they may have spent a very small amount of time with users, and then they spent hours and hours finessing a system to deliver to these people, and while they're doing that they've made so many trade-offs they totally forgot what that user truly needed. And so it really is, I think it's a fairly simple request. I would love to think that all of you out there are going to find some time to really just observe how the people you serve get their jobs done. And I would also encourage you, don't think you have to write up in-depth reports afterwards. It really is, how do you make this a lightweight activity, and you're going to learn so much from it. So that's my action item right up front. So the rest will touch on this, but I really encourage you to do that. Okay, so the 3 steps to experience design. I'm going to give you the 100,000 feet viewpoint, the 1,000-foot viewpoint, and then the 100-foot viewpoint. Each serves a really good purpose as you approach designing for user experience. So for the first point of view is to get the holistic perspective. And you probably already can tell from sort of my introduction to the topic, what I'm really interested in It's understanding that the whole perspective. And this is a type of task you don't have to do all the time, but is really good at the beginning of a project or once during the year, is to really understand sort of how everything comes together. So one particular way of doing this is to create experience maps. So I'm going to walk you through that process, and I'm also going to give you some ideas about a method called contextual inquiry. So experience maps, so they provide this holistic view. What you start off is you start to think about one particular experience that the people you serve have. And the example that I'm going to be using on and off today is the task of a parent who wants to get their child into college. So they're the parent of a high schooler and they want to get their child into college. Okay, that's the type of level of experience that you want to start with, not specifying it related to your technology specifically, but really what's the big goal that they might have. But then we start to think about what are those touch points in that experience. I'll just show you how the sketch model works. But guess what? The primary tool for creating experience maps is Post-it notes. Experience maps, as you'll see, can be kind of messy. You've got to get, human life is messy. How we really get things done, how we get a whole task done is messy. And eventually we'll be able to, we'll come up with ways to help rationalize it and bring order to small areas. But during this holistic experience, it's really important to get comfortable with the information and the insights you'll get won't feel exactly structured at the beginning. So again, this is why Post-it notes are an incredibly valuable tool. So as I said, what we'll do is when you start to create an experience map is you pick that scenario. So I said, let's think about preparing to get my high schooler into college. Then we start to think about a type of parent. We pick a couple of variables, and maybe we'll pick a parent who hasn't previously gone to college. You could pick a parent who has not a native English speaker, who has, and so then once we've got that person, these next items kind of happen all together when you're using Post-it notes, is to try and get down information that you know and you think you know about how they get this task done. What are the touch points? What are the types of tools they're using or the things they engage in to get this done? And what's the possible paths? And this is when, again, if you're using Post-it notes and have got big wall space, you're kind of just arranging those touch points and the flow just in a possible path as to how these actions might happen. And again, the cool things about Post-it notes is you can move them around, you can get rid of them, you can clarify, you can create more of them. The first stage as you're going through this is to just really download what do you know about these areas. And what we want to be doing is looking at things that you really know based on research that you may already have, and what are the things that you're really guessing about that you do need to know more about. So you start to create these diagrams, and then what you do is then you pick another parent variable, and then you kind of go through the experience again. And so eventually you'll have several different flows that highlight the different ways that people are trying to complete this task. So here, this was just an example of, you know, early in the 1900s when they used to do the underground map, they used to map it on top of a real map, and you ended up with lots of chaos and mess, even though the information was all accurate. And eventually you want to bring it to order. So when you're living in the post-it note world, this is pretty much where you're going to be. And then the next few steps actually help bring some order to it. So eventually, as you move through that process of looking at the tasks and the touch points, you will be able to rationalize it and bring it into a synthesized time frame as you go through the experience. And actually, at the end of my slides, and I know Pamela has said she will circulate them, I have a bunch of references that point to some documents and even some additional presentations that will also help you go through some of these methods in more detail. What we're trying to really get to in the end on this is you'll have a general flow of the types of tasks and activities people are doing at these different stages. But then, as a team, you then start to think, well, which of these do we do really well? Which of these does the user really have a hard time with? And it's a decision that you, based on the data that you have, based on sort of talking to ideal people, you will be able to make an assessment. And it doesn't have to be a large measurement system to add to this particular scale. You're looking to identify, wow, that's really a painful task. You know, when it comes to finding which states offer scholarships for particular colleges, it takes so much time for the user to focus on that. So you may decide to give that a low rating. And what you're looking at is like, okay, these experiences are pretty good, like the users are happy with it, people are happy, but look at here might be some poor ones. And so when you look at those are the opportunities that you might want to address. Those are experiences that you could improve upon. So that's how you eventually will identify these new opportunities. And what I would also encourage you to do is, once you've created an experience map like this, is to then add just one more layer to look at the organization experience. When you look at all these particular tasks, how easy is it for your organization to support those tasks? Because that also is going to create opportunities for areas of improvement. So here might be two areas where you go, you know, okay, whatever the task the user is trying to do here, it's also hard for the organization to provide that information. So this could be a whole area that could be really interesting to engage in. Whereas this particular opportunity, or where the organization is having challenges, users are actually feeling quite good about. So that's also worth investigating to find out how you could improve this for the organization so you can still keep creating this good experience up here. Because so often we forget that to deliver a good experience, somebody might be running 100 miles an hour behind the scenes, but because we keep getting praise up here, this person could be burning out. And so it's really important to pay attention to both those systems so that ultimately we can keep delivering great things to the public, but as an organization, you're also benefiting from good experiences and creating a great working environment. So this is just an example of a experience map to show you, yes, you can convert from a wall full of post-it notes into a more systematic diagram, and in a way that perhaps is easier to share with others. So with that particular process, as I mentioned, there may be times where you'll realize you don't have quite the information you need. And what I strongly encourage you to do is to go and find the people for whom you're creating that experience and really find out what they do and why they do it. This technique is often called contextual inquiry, and it's really based on the what are people doing and not what do they say they're doing. there are several techniques that when we bring people in for maybe a focus group, often we've moved people from their environments and they start to tell us what they think they want us to hear, or they forget about exactly why they did something because they're now creating an ideal flow, or they're something in the discussion will take them to describe a situation that perhaps didn't really fully exist. And so contextual inquiry is really the method by which you meet the participant in their environment. Now, it could be you would meet them at their home, if that's where they're starting to do research on finding ways for their kids to get into college. You could do it by meeting the particular user as they step foot into your environment at the library, if that's the place they would be going to complete the task. And what this technique is that you'll have a brief interview to gather some basic information, and then essentially it's asking the participant to complete their tasks almost as if you weren't there. The phrase you should be using more of is, show me how you would do that. Why don't you take me through that path? And I have been in many situations where I've been on site with people, and they've started to tell me about a task that they do and what the problems are. And the moment I ask, oh, okay, that's great. Now, how about you just take me through it? And the moment they start the software or reach for the forms, they'll go, oh, yeah, before I do this, I usually have to grab this other form, or I get the information from a different location. And then you become really aware of what the true flow of their work is and what the real challenges are. Whereas if I just let them tell me, some of that information is never revealed. So I highly recommend learning more about contextual inquiry and using it as one of your methods for really understanding your users. And again, there's a couple of great books. I reference one at the back, and it really is a good technique to get comfortable and familiar with. And here I also mentioned that there is, you can have people do their tasks real time, as in ask them to wait to complete that task until you're going to be with them, or doing a retrospective can also provide a lot of value, and having people, well, show me exactly how you did this, and then you'll find out a lot of information coming through that. And actually, I will tell you one particular example. When I was working on Windows, we were talking to people. We were doing some contextual inquiry on people who are new computer users, and I was talking to a particular user who's using a Mac, and they raved about the new Mac they had, and they thought it was fabulous, and they were telling me, oh, and I can create photo albums with it, and I can send photographs to my family, and I can do this and that. And when I asked them, oh, can you show me how you've done this? Well, they pulled up the photo album tool, and then it became apparent that actually they hadn't completed making a photo album. It was, they were excited about the prospect, but they actually hadn't done it. And so they were expecting it to be easy to use, but in actuality, they couldn't report on ease of use because they hadn't actually done anything with them. And that's, again, the difference between what people think and what people do. So this is the importance of having people truly take you through how they're going to approach jobs. So again, this method is really valuable, and I highly recommend looking into it. Okay, so then the next step from looking at that holistic view of looking at the experience map and identifying some areas you might want to work on. Another technique that is very common for people experiences is to create personas and scenarios, and this brings you down to the 10,000-foot view. because personas and scenarios is still going to help you understand the space, but in a little more detail. But it's still not jumping you straight into developing the absolute experience. So actually, I'm going to ask a question. How many of you have experienced or heard about personas? Again, you can probably just type in the question field if you've come across the persona work before. Okay, so I have 1 or 2 yeses. Yep, great. Yes, use them in web design, use them at the library. Okay, that's really cool that they are being used out there. And so, again, I have resources at the back and a book recommendation that I think is valuable for persona creation. So what essentially they are is it creates familiarity with your target audience. So as I said, you can start really big in that first experience that we're looking at of creating the experience map, because you're trying to get that a big view as possible to identify opportunities. Now you've moved into the opportunity, you can hone in more about, well, exactly who are we going to be creating this experience for? Who do we care about to really improve this experience? And ideally, you move into looking at something like 4 to 6 persona, 4 to 6 target audience categories. It's who you're going to want to build the product, the experience for. And the reason why you want to create personas is it helps everybody who is contributing to that experience to really focus in on an example of a real person. For many years, when we didn't use personas, this is also where the user was always thrown around in the development for software. Oh, the user does this and the user does that. Well, the software developer, when they described user, they were thinking of somebody who was pretty skilled at maybe logic, or who really understood sort of certain methods, or sort of applied a certain logic to in a problem-solving way. And yet, when somebody else said user, they were thinking of somebody who's perhaps never used a computer before. And so everybody, the products that got built really didn't serve any specific target user. And so personas have stepped in to really fill that gap. And so to create a persona, you're going to leverage what research you have available, and then also you'll do some research with those particular segments to really learn more about them. And ultimately where you're going to end up is, this is just an example here of a persona, is you give them a name. You give them a memorable name and often a tagline as well. You personalize it by giving them a quote. So what is it that really defines this particular persona and this user? And sometimes team members will only ever remember the name, the tagline, and a small piece of information about them. But while you're creating them, you really want to be looking at key facts and characteristics, because they mustn't be completely made up. You mustn't just sit in a room and go and create this person out of thin air. They really have to be grounded in research and then synthesized so that they're easy to consume. And so the recommendations really when you're creating personas, as I said, are sort of name and tagline and a quote. You want to understand the goals of what's motivating this individual. What do they really want to accomplish? Then we'll also identify things like key facts and characteristics. What are the concerns and frustrations? And sometimes you may even have some kind of background or a story to go with them. But essentially, you're trying to create this real person, or create a person that everybody believes in, knows to be based on facts, and can be used in the design process. And then from using personas, another aspect of this method is to really look at scenario creation. Scenarios are part of that storytelling background of the personas. But again, what we want the scenario is to really identify the goals and tasks that is going to guide your creation and development process. So often when you describe the scenario, you're not going to include the technology or the specific items that are going to enable it, but you're going to include the overall essence. And from this is you can break it down into particular tasks or requests, and then from there, that's when you can do the brainstorming about exactly how are you going to provide the solutions to these areas. And this final bit, I mean, it's kind of appropriate though, as we're heading towards Halloween, is you have to make sure what you've come up with in terms of personas and scenarios, that you haven't created any monsters. And by that, I'm sure you will never do this, but I have worked with teams who, as they're moving down the path of creating personas, is different groups start to add different characteristics that they want to see in a persona. And suddenly the persona is, oh look, they now have a computer science degree, and oh look, they've now, you know, and they speak multiple languages, and they have access to more information, or they have an iPad and an Android phone and an iPhone and such, because we'll end up adding too much in. So essentially they become this type of persona monster, the Frankenstein. And so it's really important that as you create them, that they feel really grounded in that information. And so this is just a validation and a check as you go through the process. And then once you've created these items, the personas especially, is you have to share and use them if you're going to use them. I have seen groups work with personas, and the group that really collaborated on the creation then failed to actually communicate them to the other people who were part of the team who really needed to use them in order for them to really get a return on investment. And so there are many fun ways that people have used personas in the past, by creating posters so people get, so your organization really gets to know who these individuals are. Quick reference cards. I mean, in the photograph you've got people who have cutouts. It's important that the organization or the teams that are working on that experience are really have this common understanding as to who these personas are. So I highly encourage you to share them. So that was the 10,000 view that really helps identify who it is you're designing for at the next level down, and what those scenarios are that your teams are now actually going to go take action on to come up with a solution for. The step 3 is actually in the specifics of the designing of experiences. So this is, you've already made the decision that the task you've identified is the right one you really want to go and address. And so we have a few methods here that you can use to make sure that you stay on target to create the right experiences. So one of the first methods you can use is looking at prototyping. And here I have examples of prototyping web-based interfaces, or software interfaces, could be phones as well. And prototyping, if you can do it early on, it's a cheap way of testing things out because people aren't writing code if it's a technology. You can use prototyping for signage by putting up signs in buildings before you are looking at the formal signage in a building. And it's, as I talked before, it's like, okay, so if you've got if you're looking at different aspects of experience and not just software, it's thinking about, well, what would the analogy be of prototyping systems, new furniture layout, like before buying new furniture and bringing furniture into a space, is there a way that you can try out what you already have in new configurations to get a sense of how things would work? And so it's like figuring out a cheap way of testing experiences is really essential to get feedback from. And again, it does take courage to do things that are going to be slightly messy or not quite complete, because you can learn from your from people in this who are trying out the prototypes. So with a prototype, you really want just sufficient information for people to be able to follow through things. And when you're doing a prototype, also at this particular stage, as I said, you've already made the decision that a user wants to do this. What you're really looking at now is, can a user do it? Does this really accomplish the task? And that's an important transition as you move into making something. So as I said, I really encourage creating the prototypes, and it doesn't have to be expensive. Paper, scissors, Sharpies. There's plenty of information online. You do not need to do formal tests. You only need to test with a couple of people to really start to shake out what are the main problems or challenges with what we've created. And the truth is, a prototype means you're probably going to get it wrong. You've got to go into a prototype session knowing that you're not going to get it right first time, and really embrace the idea of getting the feedback. The next stage is often is build and iterate, and you may have seen formal usability labs where we have one-way glass mirrors and soundproof rooms and such, and these are great environments for testing software in. But the truth is, most of the time you do not need high-end systems to evaluate experiences. You can gain an incredible amount by just sitting alongside a potential user who is giving you feedback on the system that you're building. So I really encourage you to, if you're responsible for building out a system, is to test it out as you go along, and don't be afraid to try it out. The important thing is to find people to work with who are close to that target audience that you're trying to serve, and then to have them think aloud as they try to complete tasks, and so that they'll reveal to you what's going on, what they're thinking, and then to really observe and ask clarifying questions, not "do you like this?" questions, because it's sometimes usability testing or iterate, these types of work is, we don't want to get at we really want to get at utility at this point as you go through these experiences. And as I said, paper and pencil is perfectly adequate to be able to take notes and to get the feedback from the people participating. A video camera can be useful, and the reason is because sometimes when you're working with teams who aren't there in the moment, video clips can be very powerful to help make a case of making changes. So I think it's really sort of do whatever you can to test and iterate as you move through as you move through a design and development process. And even at the very end, when you're releasing something, it's super important to find out what are going to be the opportunities to tweak and change things, even as the experience goes out the door. Sometimes, if it's software, then often it's looking at beta testing. They'll work with small audiences. But even with if it's a physical environment that you're creating an experience around and it's going at, and you're finishing the creation of a physical environment, it's, well, how much of the budget, maybe there should be a small budget that can also be held back so that as people start to live in that environment, what else needs to be changed or addressed and fixed? Because again, it's in any designing situation, it's extremely rare to get it right first time. And we really know that sort of these end of iterations, it's super important to be able to improve the products and the experiences. And then it's always important to obviously evaluate and learn. And this is often when surveys come into use, and even focus groups. Now with surveys, my only comment on surveys is to usability test your surveys. It is to, as you finish designing them or creating them, is have somebody, preferably a target user, somebody outside your particular organization or group, have them read it aloud and answer the questions verbally, because I guarantee that their phrasing of what you have written is not going to be the same as how you have phrased or set questions. And they're going to interpret the questions slightly differently. And so by having somebody just read through a survey and doing it a couple of times, I guarantee you will be able to improve the quality of your surveys. Focus groups are also said that you'll often use those to do an evaluation and to learn from session. But my caution there is always that say versus do, is to really dig into what did they actually do when they were in certain situations and environments, as opposed to what they're thinking. So focus groups is a great technique, but really we're just being cautious around that particular area. And then the final point is observation and interviews, and it's back to that, always be observing what your users are doing, what the people in your experiences are doing. That's a great way of evaluating whatever it is you have experience you have been creating. So I'm just going to sort of identify a few of the action items as you go through. Is first of all, if you want a holistic approach to experience, it's going to be messy. It's going to require, life is messy, and so this is why that first stage is going to feel sort of more chaotic. You can bring order to understanding and mapping out a holistic experience, but feel comfortable in getting messy, because that's where you're going to find the real nuggets of opportunities and what you will be able to address and solve for people in your system and in your environment. Second one is get everyone on the same page about who the people are in the experience you're creating. This is that creation of personas and scenarios. Having everybody talk the same language, who's doing the building and the creation, is super important, and it gets everyone moving in the right direction. And then the third one is iterate your ideas quickly with real people to learn and understand what works and what doesn't work. And again, that is whether it's a physical environment or software environment, it's to do your best to sorry, I got distracted by something on the screen, I apologize. To do your best to approximate the experience you're trying to deliver, because it will really help with that iterative experience. And to do it, like, there are very cheap ways of iterating. This process doesn't have to be expensive. Delivering great experiences doesn't have to be expensive. It requires you to really think and engage with users and to pay attention at that level. And I said, and my final request is to really try and find 2 hours to observe how the people you serve get their jobs done. Whether you invest in doing anything related to the holistic experience or iterative the people experiences. I think everybody in whatever work they do should spend time really observing others and asking them questions about what they do in their work. That was one thing that one takeaway we had from our large conference on user experience careers was those that were in positions of vice presidents of user experience. One critical skill they had developed over time was to really understand what the work was of the people around them, because by doing that they knew they were able to position and organize the user experience work to really deliver. And so it really is valuable to know what the people you serve, how they get their jobs done. So that's my overview here. I just had one question that has come in. Is the UX activity something that a novice can do, or will it be more successful if guided by an expert? As I said, that's a great question, and my belief is, well, like many things, the more you do it, the more experience you have, and you will learn as you move along. And of course, I said, there are people that are particularly trained in these methods. So if you have plenty of resources, maybe it's a good idea, and you have the opportunity to engage with somebody who's experienced in these areas, go ahead and do that. But I recommend is actually shadowing them. If you bring somebody in to do some user experience work, shadow them as much as you can to learn from how their methods and how they're approaching things, because there is a great deal that you can do and you can learn if you're really willing to spend the time on it. What I've provided here, again, you'll get this in the handout, will be these are different resources about the methods, and there are, in fact, some. I've included a couple of online courses as well, and Chris Nodder in particular offers a beginner's course through lynda.com, and he has some great, just very easy practical methods to get you started in user experience. So it is an area that I believe you can teach yourself. You won't get it right first time, but you will definitely learn things. And if it's a choice between no user experience attention or having a go yourself, have a go. I really think you will learn an awful lot by engaging with users and your target audience. Okay, so that summarizes my talk today. I am available for questions. I have used quite a bit of the time, but if you have additional questions, then please send them in. So let's just see if any questions are coming in.
Keynote's panel, I don't see any questions at the moment.
Okay.
I guess we could wait 1 minute, or I could ask you something that I've wondered about, and that is, I mean, some of the libraries are very small. They have very small numbers of staff.
Yep.
How do you go about deciding what user experience you want to tackle first? I mean, you have to prioritize somewhere.
Yes. So if you're working in a small environment, I think if you're working in a small environment, you definitely prioritize. I think spending some time thinking about what type of resources do you have available to address user experiences. You know, maybe you have some budget that can be applied to a physical environment. Maybe you have some members of staff who are more who are interested in solving more technical problems and such. So one is obviously consider what resources you have to make change, and then if you think about if you're in a small library, which group, which segment of the population you serve, where are you seeing some pain points? And so you can identify sort of what those particular areas are, and then it's a balance, I think, between understanding what those pain points are and what you have resources to actually address, and then you can start to look at, okay, so what specifically now is that experience, and then you can dig in more deeply at that one area. And look at the personas and the scenarios for that particular audience that you've identified.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, like, in some ways, the reality is, I believe it's like you balance between really what the people need and where the pain points are. But I think you need to consider what resources you have to address those pain point areas. And again, whichever group you're part of, you know best. Is there a way you can ask for extra resources to be able to address, a physical situation or not? And if the truth is you can't solve that, one, you might find some easy, like an alternative way of addressing problems, or maybe you should invest in another area that you really can move the bar on in terms of experience. So I think it comes from it's two sides as to how you would go about prioritizing.
All right, thank you. Dana, there is one new question that I've just seen on the screen. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
Oh, yeah.
We've been asked if you could speak to one or a few current case studies which are proving to be particularly successful. Do any come to mind? Not particularly in libraries. This doesn't say it particularly in libraries, but just other than the example you gave of trying to identify how to prepare a student for college applications.
Yep. Okay, so sort of specific examples would be using, getting people hooked up and using e-readers. So e-readers are incredibly popular right now. Mm-hmm. And I know that, but being able to download information and books onto e-readers still remains a challenge. And so that particular example would be really understanding, well, what types of, how are people really using e-readers, and how are they going about downloading information onto those devices, and where are the problems and challenges occurring? And in that situation, you could really observe users and have them take you through those situations. That's also the type of situation where you go, you know what, January or end of December might be a good time to do that type of project, because that's when people are perhaps getting more e-readers are being received. Mm-hmm. So you can understand that experience. But then you could also then start to look at what type of documentation and information you have online as to how it truly helps people with those tasks. And so it's not right. So in that area, it's like, I know that some libraries have good, accurate information, let's say just accurate information, to help users out in doing library loans for digital books. But the truth is like there's accurate information and then there's usable information, and so that's a space where you could do some very quick usability testing type of work to really try out downloading, have people, you give them a task, mm-hmm. You want to download the latest book by John Grisham. How would you go about doing it from our website? And you leave them at that point and see exactly how easy that particular task is, and then that would help provide those recommendations for areas to go address. So that's quite a focused-in type of specific example.
There are two other questions that have come in, or maybe more like comments, and I'll read these to you. somebody writes, we haven't stated what happens if we have questions once we start, roadblocks, etc., in a month or so. So I guess the question is, what do you do after you've begun the study and you have these roadblocks that pop up?
So, right. So we haven't started at what?
I think it means stated and not started.
Right, okay, we haven't stated what happens. Okay. Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay, so for the nearly all projects I have worked on, there are always unforeseen circumstances that show up no matter how well we plan. Whether it's situations where a reorganization happens, critical people disappear, funding gets taken, and I've also worked on experiences where we were very optimistic that a particular UI or a way we were approaching a problem would be great. And then when we got to that, the prototyping and the development phase, sometimes a developer may find it's not possible to implement something the way we wanted, or they had agreed, oh yeah, we can solve this with a database backend, and then the speed isn't as good as it should be. And so for each one of those, you're going to have trade-off points. But I tell you what, the most important thing is that if you have created, I said, the persona and the scenario that you really want to address, then you're going to try and make those trade-offs to still enable that scenario. And actually, one thing I didn't include in this, in the presentation, was setting goals, user goals. I mean, they are in the scenarios in some ways. And really what you want to be able to do is, you know, a goal would be, let's take the e-reader one, is to be able to get online and download a book within like 15 minutes for the first book. That seems reasonable. But then if something comes up and that's not going to be possible, well, it's okay, so what other avenues are available to us to address that? Is it more information up front? For the user, are we stuck with just text assistance versus actual improving the like more of the UI and buttons? So those are the kinds of you know, it's looking for different areas where you can trade off and still accomplish the task. Mm-hmm. If that person who asked the question had a particular roadblock in mind, that would be great if they want to just add a little more information on that.
All right, well, while we're waiting to see if more comes in, there's one other question. What are some strategies for getting a more hierarchical work culture to do more collaborative work like this productively?
Yep, that's a great question. And you know, one of the things is like I have often tried, like there are formal methods to try to get collaboration to happen. One method that sometimes helps is, I said, that post-it note strategy at the beginning of creating a wall space and putting the post-it notes up as you're discussing things. Having a place in a hallway, a corridor, on your door if you have an office, having a physical representation of experience can really make a difference and help people engage and provide comment, because it's away from your normal, I'm the presenter in a meeting room and you're going to listen to me, or we're going to specifically, you know, there's a right way of doing it and a wrong way, I'm now delegating to you, because everybody gets more anxious around those types of things, because it's like my group against your group and who owns this and what. But the more you can bring it into a common space, the better. And that's why, you know, one of the photographs had the somebody standing next to like the cutouts of the personas. That's bringing the the people you serve into your environment so you see them on a regular basis. So there are ways, all these experience approaches, or certainly the first few, are really, they benefit from being collaborative and inviting other people in. And there really is, as I said, there's no absolute right or wrong answer. So definitely try to sort of bring people in that way and keep it very more free-flowing and encourage them to get out to meet their users and talk to their users. The work that I've done as like most of my career has been in user experience and user research, and at the end of the day, it was very hard often being on an engineering team where I was one of the individuals that didn't write code, didn't create design, I didn't write text. The only way I could have impact was to influence others, and so it was constantly having to integrate and pull people in to think about these experiences. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Gaina. That's very, very helpful. I think we're just about out of time, so I think we'll try to wrap up now. There is at least one other question which we'll send you, and if you wouldn't mind answering it in writing, we'll send the reply out to everybody when we send out the link to the recording.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for spending your time with me today. I hope I've been able to provide you with an overview of user experience. And I said the resources, there's lots of great people in the community, and there are a lot of great resources online. So I encourage you to look at that resource list as it gets sent out. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And let me just say that I found this to be a fascinating presentation, and I think you captured the essence of the user experience very, very well and have shown us how we can incorporate it into our own environment. You will shortly receive a survey about today's session. We hope you will take a few minutes to respond, because your answers help us as we plan future continuing education offerings, including webinars, online courses, and e-forums. And please note the schedule of ALCTS continuing education events for the fall, including webinars on topics both conventional and innovative. New sessions of the online courses will be starting soon, and an e-forum is also on the calendar for December. As we conclude today's program, I would like to recognize Mary Reeder and Mike Priest for providing technical support. They, members of the staff in the ALCTS office, Julie and Emily, and other members of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee provide a variety of behind-the-scenes support, making these events possible. So, Gaina, thank you again very much for today's session. We thank all our attendees for being so attentive, and we wish you a good afternoon and look forward to welcoming you again at an ALCTS webinar in the future.